the Thank you very much, Dr. Henderson, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So, I just first of all, I want just to thank the organizers for inviting me just to share with you some of the story, but also some of the lesson learned from Rwanda that can be also translated or also duplicated in different parts. Like our colleague was saying here, related to the trauma. Trauma is everywhere. So the types of trauma are different, but the response is the same because we have common human genome. That's why just the study that I wanted just to share with you is now focusing on what's happened in Rwanda until back almost 3 decades ago. 1994, genocide. We have seen after post-genocide, the society, the trauma survivors, and also people in the expressing some of the consequences of the 1994 genocide. I was able to see that our colleague Dr. Henderson had been there just freshly after 1994 genocide. You could see now what happened 3 decades ago in the house. So, just a little bit about the background. So I come from that small spot, that is the Rwanda, the small, which is a small country, close to 27,000 square kilometers, 14 million population, common language, which is well speaking this apart from the official language, which is French and English, but common language is Kinyarwanda. So that's really some of the insights to understand one nation speaking one common language, understanding each other, can lead to and do what happens to this country. So actually, some of these countries started not really in 1994 genocide. It started in 1959. This country used to be a kingdom until 1959 when we got the revolution, and after 1962, the independence. So it's been at that time, from 1959, under colonization by Belgium. And then the division started that time until the revolution in 1959. Some of the conflict started that time. That's where most of the people just targeted at that time started just to get dark, violent dark page that could see around depression because this kind of pushing and then the road out of the country as refugees. Since that period, you can understand almost 3 decades, since 1959 until 1994, that's where we did this atrocity, the genocide. What a bad one to see the killed. You can see the country was destroyed. There was a lot of insecurity, refugees, and also the country was completely destroyed. So that's a little bit about my background. That country which was nearly destroyed. So did I choose me to do genetics? Actually, I was born during that period where the period of conflict happening just before 1994. And then it will be started when I was back when I was just to have this kind of habit, hobby. And my hobby was just to my family. And I was interested in first starting production. Production is wrong. But the consequences that are seen when I can see just my preparation from just the generation one to generation three, tracing the first starting production. I started just to see some of the problems, the observations. So you can see in this some civil political separation like abuse by justice. And I'm not wrong about this. I was just not having any information about what we call the single bullshit. And then some of the my application started just dying because what I could have done was just to separate them from the first generation to the next generation. And this way could just prevent the consanguinity within the nation. So this was just my first curiosity to do science. And I get to that situation when I started just to my postgraduate studies to go and just study the genetics in Belgium. And then I could understand some of the metabolic diseases, how they happen in humans. So I studied this particular studying this particular disease called cystic fibrosis, which is not common in the human. I was seeing some of the examples of symptoms similar to cystic fibrosis in patients. Well, patient with malnutrition, without any prevalent, regardless the mutation in the treatment, were not really prevalent, and also coming from the families who are really good better. So it was really one of the insight to understand and also to think about something which was not really the malnutrition, but in genetic disease. Now this played back, this effort to think about this going started the first results to understand what was happening. So we could just identify first implications, including the common gene is called the CFTR, but also another gene, the gene called INA, which is a sodium channel. And then we could confirm that to that effect for the first time in African population, black population. And then just filming, my training, just a training, there was my motivations in my fusion of I was able to say that I could just do something in Africa. To do Center for Rural Genetics, South Africa was one of the first countries with the values to which the center. But when we go in West Africa, Central Africa, there was no any Center for Human Genetics. So, but when I was training, I also struggled just to establish the Center for Human Genetics to respond to some of the issues like the first segregation we could not understand, to respond to some of the situation we have in literally in Africa. Well, it was come back from established the center, specialized the center with funding, and then you come to a country like Rwanda, the construction, the building of the country, there's no funding for supporting the genetic center. So it's just a challenge. It's a challenge. Just to start from scratch, into the first service, and then there's dedicated funding from the government or institutions. One of the strategies of that was just to raise the funding from the government for research grants. So this we trying to some of the economists, some of the funding to the risk is not aggressive, just to show some of the major funding institution like university, to contrast debt foundation among others. Just to give you just my story. So we can see this in the last 15 years, we're trying to submit over 130 applications. And I said, this is just during COVID time. We just had a kind of drop, just to show one of the motivation to just raise this fund the price to be able to be sustainable. And 32, 24%. Well, just that regardless the effort put here. This is just to show you that don't give up. We'll never give, and we can show you over 140 on the success rate. However, this effort that it provides will just lead you to design some of the study like a diversity study of genetics. So, back to our history. That is just Firstly, graduate to the streets and to studying to do to implementation and all that. Also to solve some of the problems, like the post-traumatic stress disorder. So, when I was not really doing the PTSD, so you can genocide other context. That's not so currently. What's happening since the last 3 years? Gaza, Sudan, and then some people out to their own country. And we take over examples of PTSD, that traumatic event that we just wanted to PTSD. And no better than me as a psychologist, that different symptoms of so flashback, depression, anxiety, hallucination, and others that will affect this issue. In other situation, in Rwanda, you can see, for example, you can't assert to survival, genocide survival. This is very high. Well, yes, when you compare to general population, 34%. And then we do 10% of depression. You understand? Well, the general statistics shows 4%. This is a visual. Has some to do with it. Also, we as human society, post-traumatic society, we see this kind of depression very high. And if you begin to this can lead to some chronic condition, so even suicide. At African continent, this continent is very rich in diversity, different of diversity. And we tried to understand, according to some diversity, the idiomatic in this continent. However, we could find this the idiomatic landscape is still a little unexplored, which means that we don't have different genetic diversity in Africa. And when it comes to this and PTSD, there are some just standards. I think first, Holocaust has really tried to predict the release of epigenetic PTSD. Sometimes back that was just the time I started just thinking about some epigenetic device that the prediction that she was just putting the was confirmed to as a study based on that evidence that I'm just which are really very good because paradigm the strategy, the community, the scientific community was just about the intergenerational transmission of epigenetics across generations. So, just the need to for social manipulation to children over the sinners, the for example, because the concept of conditions can surrender to the so is also just through those through the DNA sequence. This change was happening I saw and then so but what will be the up to now? Just the time we started to work on this because of epigenetic defect by TST, to pattern of person just out of discussing very started from South Africa, like even IPV is also as of the genetic defect. And then, so the levels, this is was first lady in mice who have seen something related with PTSD. So the after stimulation and also expressing the PTSD symptoms. So this window to understand what was happening. And first, with this trauma, to do that, it can be passed down to the generation, but it can move the message to the children can traumas, this traumatic event. And you can just apply the intergenerational, the transgenerational, and multi-generational. Just building is transmitted across generations. So there are different mechanisms. And for example, the first one is intergeneration. You have multi-generation, and transgeneration. Yes, well, just the transmission through the that's unity. Others who are pregnant, exposed to trauma, transmitting the disease like I'm showing them this the mice. What's happening? You can see actually our research questions started almost 15 years after the genocide. When I was in high schools, these children, someone who dreams to be a doctor, to be a psychologist, to be an MD PhD, to be a geneticist. However, what's happened in this country, one time we have this competition period happen, it's an annual event happening in July, which is a period of 100 days. These children receive news having to see issues of PTSD, hallucination, depression, and also identities at the school, poor performance at the school. So we could not even understand, just give an connection to this. I think we started just the characteristics of these children. Most of these children were born in 1994, aside from the mother's home. It's not a thing. This is a lot of fast research question also. So then we just went back to understand how we can just address this issue. In Rwanda, there's this association of genocide. We see this woman, trauma survivors. Just an association just followed by psychologists who provide psychotherapy about the patients. Then our research program to be part of the program going to work to. So together since the last 2 years, just to solve the issue to understand it. On research group, where if you're a psychologist, you and then we got chance to get access to some funding from to that's almost and we do the first PTSD phenotype that they designed. It was designed which was designed just to collect the PTSD symptoms of psychologists to understand the level of PTSD related to some categorization. These are 13 nodes or some 5 or so and others. And then leader of department. How do we do this? We test control. The tests that have been received in the country and world. Trauma to genocide. And also the Rwanda, due to the history was called 1959. Because we have some the same characteristics to be so, but also not that skill from that such study receive the level of PTSD between cultural materials, you see the film of the children down to exposed in the culture. our first evidence. So the depression, the BDR too, we could see the pollution, the investment, just the function. And then we want to explore, we want to start to explore the H2 axis. Particularly to tell agree, this just is a cascade. When we have a stress, this cascade is activated. There is a stimulation of the hypothalamus, and then which will just reduce the corticotropin release hormones here. You see how much this will travel to your pituitary, to stimulate hormones, ACT, and so you just deserve a lot of that. That's how just the source happen. Feedback, negative feedback, the situation, do you see the cortisol just a reservoir? After this, that's really going to be non conserved. So when we explore this, the population from the parents first, we can see explore the children and it is our compatible response. Even that other biomarkers from H2 axis to glucocorticoid, corticoid, you see vibrations. We finally get more to the spells that will. Those are one of the first days that we can the 2014. We also went far to understand on epigenetic level. We just had finally selected 51, which is created with vinegar, take filk up, but it is still the strategy. And then that's true. You can also see the power CPG, the high motivation in these genes in exposed mothers and the children of 1994 genocide. Very compared to non-exposed. And then this just felt big to explore on the right competitive this funding from Emirates to extend the transmission, and also to study the affiliated from your side, the Nazi. And using a bit was aircraft, use the same approach, research to technology design, and till this time it was trying to understand and provide we did analyze the association to understand human scale. Even in a and focus on the cortical receptor network genes, rather of 82 genes characterizing that in the to see if we can just find some of the target genes in the neuroside that can just experiment this genetic mechanism. And then we start to work through some of the qualities, cultural DNA. This is just to be able to show you motivation to prosperity of the GMO. And so this provides just the accuracy of the controls in similar part. The sex of describes, of course, just type of solution and also identification of sex in this. Plus, it's tested children had teenage for genocide, for those are the best lesson. And then, as of that, those occasion, the second time, we found for the first time two Jews Syrian who had two Jews that I motivated. See on this figure, you see the high, I mean the dark. That's where we have the high motivation. Still more close to one. Actually, the motivation is just measured between the sector. to and came closer to just resonating. So we see these rules every time we see those, which are but the common arrival is just a little genocide exposure. The two Jews really include in response, but as an children and true. This is the food. Well, the Latino and the cultural genes. And we also went into the standard to cover the fairly mathematical different disciplines which are you can see the experimental radars, several genes, 4 genes. We don't find anything much, but there's what social experimental radars for the children. 16 genes were found in this one to spare the children. This really was really very surprising. And just some of the others, we could just see the common genes, 6 genes here, also related to the symptoms that have been seen in our patients in our cohort. These are very significantly connected to the brain and the use our research group. So it's still suggesting those referral programs that we have seen the signals that related to depression, anxiety, hallucination, all type of symptoms. But these genes were the first time had been identified and the target for the consumer medicine. Just to give you a story, in our research group participants, we have had some of the women who have been under treatment, antidepressant treatment for several times without improvement. So, because they have this mutation, these candidate genes. So, either psychotherapy that can be presented in person as some description and that of this, there have been some improvement. However, there's still to understand these genes, how this just can be improved drug design. The relation of this mechanism and PTSD, again, look at this. This stress, there's a trade just to the acute situation, to increase the cortisol, and also some evaluation of the cortical because like choose the very traffic for example, which is and also in conditions like PTSD. Some of the principles to do from to do PTSD. Also, to learn, in addition to this, you just activate which are the signal can affect the victim and also to some of the depression and which is pituitary to signals activity impacted also PTSD and the these short proteins like a severity and the two severity, those proteins also PTSD. So let's start to in addition to H2 axis biomarkers. And we try not to correlate the symptoms. This is when I play fever, telling you it is the symptoms in the cell. The first one is just the there's a brothers in 1984 genocide, and there's a control, the first child, then in 1994, and the second child, the young siblings born after 1994. So we can see in the world the symptoms have been expressed syndrome. The symptoms are really different, so which is the concept of PTSD with generational transmission of PTSD symptoms. Now, figures, these are research uh, well, to the first time. So this studies the axis other because it is the symptom. Just want your attention. Just see the box because you can't read the just this is control on the quality. Those are the cases of the whole figures. But for the first one, well, explore number two. The cases are versus that two children is children first second second child of us. And listen to the yes, symptoms. Yeah. So, and for negative relation, so there's responsibility as well in terms of illness. That's the axis of the biological control and zone. Then get it. Then outside the HBO, but when the HSP severity, the protein and 27 also very hard. And around when you to the just the variation between the children, higher children than mothers. And look at the baby. It also because the children here, and then the last one, the expected well. These are the strong elements, but because that's strong for the first time, the correlation of the biological and PTSD symptoms in this kind of trauma exposed to. And the very interesting figure here, the thing, did everybody genetic lifestyle signatures? We try just to do this is the last figure. In this correlation, you can see the two brains and two tasks, the cortical unit, cortisol, and the cortical unit. And then we try just to make different genes that will be modified then we have the strong color, the strong color, genes and strong color. It is because which has different different this is pictures on person that have different tests to see this to this like so you can predict it to be but genetic defected. In the last one, we do the correction the default DMA showing automatic yes. And this you can see the strong correlation with the Jews who are we see the Jews who are very tackle. So very strong evidence of no solution, but also we will happy when we will just having a findings to see this publication happen. So published this year in Zimbabwe refugees, spiritual bacterial solution. Listen to the village region since 1980s. You can see from the 1980s. This it was a different genetic signatures that you can see by this code. So we confirming balance to findings and just last month, also, just in this paper from Gaza, they predicted this genetic epigenetic effect happening in this population. They just trying to use to understand what is to happen in this population, even and see some the signals of PTSD and so transmission. Just to give you skill studies here that can be created generally when we see the conflict happening to so the consequences that we can just keep in our mind. Now, just to finish, we come from understanding the story of what's happening in this country. We try just to do some studies, but to have some observations. However, I just want to show you, of course, we are still, we still have some mechanism to don't really understand. Try just to continue understanding the mechanism of epigenetics. That is a key factor for some of the symptoms, but also decrease of certain effect that we see in our population. So, for the case of Rwanda, we use different tools. The started by indication problem, and also we can see rapid socio-economic and security transformation of the country. We see the infrastructure, access to this national infrastructure, the authority, and some environment, education, have access to carry out. For example, the fast rate, just for the promotion of girls' education, security, to the president, and the leadership. All of these contribute to the environment, to the children of the environment, and contribute to the type of symptoms of PTSD. We have seen in our vision followed over the last 15 years, the improvement. For example, I didn't, when we started the research question, the children of the school percentages and change to the women first. So being psychotherapy, access to these different trades happening in the country, like access to some of the activities just the visions contributed to the resilience about the change. And the symptom that I'm just showing you, this week has before as a baseline. So the symptoms which will show changes. And then we just better to show you those changes. That's all to be funded by contrast for the next 5 years. Tuning and follow up and say direction just to understand the presentation of the transgeneration, digital generation, effects to the next generation, and especially the generation 2. The generation 2 from the children born in 1984. Because to do more than 30 years old, some of the children have children, so we're focusing this. Also, to understand the influence in this generation 1 and 2. This is very interesting localistic sites because just a subset of samples that we are going to follow here. To start with, to analyze the glutination, the age, the patient, but also the response to understand what's happening. Because this is our response. The community engagement is around 2 because we are very sensitive. The aperture is also matters in this context. So we are trying not to countries have suggest different participant better direction for country to try to understand the impact of epigenetic PTSD was across the country, and also come up with a correlation in another in this context. Just a definition. I will that so that to say that this has been this is a concept of genetic and the PTSD transmission across all nations. The studies done, the genome registration studies discovered related to latent phenotype conditions that we have discussed here. But the most really curious, we say, message is just the education of different biological variables over time. We are finding this validation almost a few decades ago. This is just impressive. And the last one, the person that is supposed could be so big and so large from Rwanda. Then I want just to show you, there's article argument here, just we're looking at from the experts from one of the, from, so, from, we've had, of course, our participants from different organizations available in the book, and also acknowledge the support from NIH and the contract. Thank you very much for your understanding.
Really, we have time for questions now. First of all, thank you for your excellent presentation. Of course, there's a great interest in me, and it actually reminded me I really need to get back to Kigali because those pictures you showed, when I was at, nothing like that. Sure. Difficult, is it?
Very good question. Do I take from not the region? So, the still develop stones. Then the first DMR, just to do regions. The cystic fibrosis. To understand what I say. And the that's the process of some separation. This different genes. Today, just to start the concept of the tears, which involve different mechanisms. Well, till H2, there's an activation, it's a cascade activation of different hormones. So H2 active. There are different genes involved in this mechanism, and then it's good to do it when it reliable situation study because in that case you can have different genes. It could be not to say that you can from the disease to corporate disease. Since it does a couple of different genes, genetic
Question. Thanks, thank you. And then when you think, I didn't ask a bit about and I think it's wonderful this control study that you have, but I was wondering about the hypothesis that there was one genocide, there was one event that caused a lot of trauma in our West.
But these are people who have lived for another 30 years. So are you controlling for potentially other events that might have happened to them? I'm not sure what the rates of IPV are in your country, but surely there must have been, there's life as well that has happened since then, and that have other events that might be potentially also traumatic.
Very good question. Actually, I was the discussion we asked already. Talking, we asked the same question, of course. The other different confounding happening. So, but time we have seen this over, and of course, some will also experience sad part of violence, health information. But you know, because the country went back. I think if I was that country, we will have some conflict like it did, for example, the RC, we ought to have been made. Whether the transformation, the society has been established, but to come out somewhere, what we need to receive to value. That's what. Uh, Learning is a problem like this one. We start to get the same genetic defect. Genetic is refers to defaulting to further. How we respond to that trauma. How we and but little discussion people will do the way some the way of the code. They also expect this kind of physical physical trauma, physical violence. That I think that's also studying this group. Also, let's say, I don't really need to study Adam to come up with the simple because not the simple and still the same so it doesn't matter just to study differently. Because I don't finding the same found it's just to do readers related study. I just in the back guys and the PTSD and they come back and see if there is so and related to this separation possible. So the PTSD symptom for the epigenetic but after we still see this genetic. There's epigenetic mutation in a society the strong the symptom that's very sensitive for the test there's activation of any traumatic event affected than others. Okay, thank you for your presentation. I'm Odet Kibo, postdoctoral research fellow, interested in trauma and design. So my question is related to the children because PTSD is going to move from one to clearly demonstrated that it moves from the mothers to the children. So we should find out if there is any intervention to eradicate or prevent this PTSD in children or depression because I feel like intervention being for the mothers, but if the children, nothing is done for the children, it is the next step. Thinking about the children. Very good question as well. The children actually have been patient and targeted as well. Because I showed started when they were 15-year-old, just at that age were at the high school, jumping them. We are orphans at the school, PTSD symptoms, especially during the commemoration period. So the intervention had till fast the children able to through the as well. So some service intervention services just to make kind of accompanying this treatment. And then we have seen really event improvement. Those who are families to be killed, and then also we understand several outreach program for the engagement, outreach program to explain the findings from the study, that also some intervention that could be done. The very notable support from psychologists, and also of course the school support. So there's just children are being in this, and we clearly see the drastic time. Yeah. There are many Christians.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. I'm really excited to see this because whenever we see genetic studies, epigenetic studies, on PTSD in Africa, it's very scarce. And one of the recurrent recommendation of PGC PTSD has been like more capacity building, more genetic research in PTSD in Africa to have the very diverse genetic pool. So I'm really excited for that. So I have two questions. As we know, to do genetic study, phenotyping matters. So, and we also know that PTSD symptoms are highly influenced by culture. So how did you manage to phenotype PTSD symptoms? I admire that you tried to do symptom level correlation, but when you do disorder level correlation like PTSD, depression, and so on, how did you manage to have like precise, accurate descriptions of the latent construct? My other question is, again, symptoms like people can have the outcome of interest due to individual things or environmental factors. So the parents in this study were themselves highly affected by trauma. So their behavior and parenting of the children influence the children, and the children may develop genetic change process. So did you try to disentangle the direct biological transmission from the mother's PTSD to the children and the consequence of the mother's behavior to the experience of trauma? And thank you.
Well, good question. So actually, the first one is a good comment for the capacity building. So we with this amount of this evidence is we also wanted to do something for the continent, for African scientists to establish some of these programs. So as we are speaking, so at the University of Rwanda, where I'm affiliated to, we have now established a new program for master PhD in genetic epigenetic, and especially the genetic program in this just is also open to all African scientists who want just to come, just to run, and also out of Africa. This is really very good one. Just to do some kind of studies, and this one is good to do kind of translational to establish something that can be impactful for the population for Africa. First question, the PTSD symptoms correlation, the truth, how do this action use the H through Africa tool? The H through Africa, if you go to the website of H through Africa, we see there's a tool that has been extensively developed to excessively detail different symptoms of PTSD using different tools psychologists, better than me, just to make sure that even we categorize the children, there are different tools applied to children and also to adults. That's how we came up with a precision to these symptoms that I'm just sharing with you. And these tools are available. We publish them. We can access them, but it's a case by case. When we apply to a population, we need to do first the primary thing, and then we need to validate them. Second question, environmental factors are the biological transmission and matters. So what we try to do in this recent study that will be published soon, we did very research differently from the piloting phase. The piloting phase we do not have enough tools just to do some biological and methylation studies. Even the piloting study, the typing. We have this things that I mentioned to showed you the slide. You can see to seek the type genome and to the also called findings from methylation studies to practices and also symptoms in all categories. Mothers, children, pet genocide, and then children, petrol. So we see the coming publications, this are very extensive. So that's how we come up with this tool. Now, something that I mentioned, some mechanisms that are strong. Like some the children don't have to intimate from yourself. Having similar symptoms like children develop from genocide because the other even the society is but there are other pathologic factors like drug abuse. The other abuse will be very also contributing as a can be considered as a bias. So those are some of the such that we consider discuss.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mutesa. I'm Moenina Kasuja. I'm from Makerere University. I'm a psychiatrist. So you presented very clearly the epigenetic changes that happen after trauma. I wanted to appreciate the role that the vicarious re-traumatization in the community where this is happening, the effect that has on the symptoms that you actually try to evaluate for, because people keep on talking about these things, and even if the children were not present at that time when the event happened, they keep on hearing about it as if they were present. I mean, I feel it too when I'm all the way in Uganda. So what role does that play on the symptom expression vis-a-vis what you're seeing in the genetic changes?
The same question was also being asked when we started. I think the children started to be expressing the symptom. This was what we had to just to understand. Same. So that related to those epigenetic. Yeah, that's where we find the solution. At that time, we could not find a solution to this because I will explain someone was born after 19 minutes expressing anxiety and the other types of symptoms stability. So we try just to understand this, but of course this is that is a case by case. Case by case. It's a strong practice on this. Then sometimes to different some experience from the private cases. In addition to what person's physical value, emotional value. You see, symptoms and different symptoms.
Thank you. Representation. During representation, mention that the intervention is in place, reduce the symptoms among those expressing this gene. And I wanted to find out if evidence was collected about the timing of the intervention and the modality of the intervention that can be used in other cases of traditional trauma in other settings.
You need the
Intervention, said intervention was for the children, and now the symptoms were not expressing the symptoms of the PTSD. And I was asking if evidence was collected about the intervention modality and timing that can also be used in other settings.
exactly. The answer is yes, but also it's a case by case. Depending on different type of trauma. Let's take example of IPV. I was even discussing on one of our colleagues, she's working on the IPV. If you want an intervention from it, in fact, the environment where the IPV is happening, if you stress factor, you can decrease the PTSD symptoms. You can also prevent the epigenetic death to happen. Because initially, epigenetics doesn't pass a blood mechanism. To depend on they can be stable when them transmitted over generation. So intervention will be different depending on the type of violence. If you take example of even trauma exposed to sound, trauma exposed maybe to different that our communication in South Africa. Give an example of that type of the American soldier coming from the traumatic event is to start learning expressing the PTSD symptoms. Many studies that you can find that can start to happen. Interventions happening with this kind of solve psychological interventions, and depending on the situation of the soldier has been experiencing the field, can just say some of them. Everything is back for improvement, but in stress case like this is also environment factor, but also is trauma-related event. Thank you so very much. I'm called Jenny, and I'm from Uganda, House. It was the first, it was 130 years, and the first one we performed, 6 members of science were around 7,000 students, and then as well as we talked about physics, and we talked to know that that's the reason why how supposed to do students, because most of the cases that have cancer found that most the current time from literally come to commit suicide. I get some that not suicide cases. Because so when something is very hard on the current handle, so how can we do this generation of how to handle the right in case of anything that is mentioned? Thank you. And that's the question. Because I like this question because also when I was studying, we're still working in the school process, counselors, the possibility for the children over time. We are also trying to implement some programming within different schools, especially high schools. There are different programs within our education system going down in primary school, just to teach this, also to prevent this kind of mental issues to happen. So this case is a case by case. So the case, well, of course, the school counselor, the teachers, the children, and parents. Those are true to understand the causes. And of course, you have seen just to try to understand from the beginning and when the end, finding that was the cause, the transmission. In this case, I'm sure we are dealing with different issues. Could be drug abuse, it could be maltreating back home, could be how do you call it again, the children born from the trauma men, to mothers. Those also translate to the issues to the children. It could be the school. The children treating the children, the colony. You see, it's a personal case. We have seen this. Try just, of course, when the design questionnaire, well, these questions to genocide exposure. Of course, we found all of those issues that you have. And when it comes to how do them, so what you use, you also needing the psychologist to support you in this context. The psychologists are better than the psychologists are the approach in the children is the different approach like in the adult. So I'm going to for the children, the support from psychotherapy that apply to children. Consider many questions.
I have not said, well, we have to end, get on to the next page. So thank you very much, Doctor. This was like
Very much, Bandas, which are